The Nauru Regional Processing Centre was an offshore Australian immigration detention facility in use from 2001 to 2008 and from 2012 to 2019. Located on the South Pacific island nation of Nauru and run by the Government of Nauru. The use of immigration detention facilities is part of a policy of mandatory detention in Australia. The Nauru facility was opened in 2001 as part of the Howard government's Pacific Solution. The centre was suspended in 2008 to fulfill an election promise by the Rudd government, but was reopened in August 2012 by the Gillard government after a large increase in the number of maritime arrivals by asylum seekers and pressure from the Abbott opposition. Current Coalition and Labour Party policy states that because all detainees attempted to reach Australia by boat, they will never be settled in Australia, even though many of the asylum seekers detained on the island have been assessed as genuine refugees. The highest population at the centre was 1,233 detainees in August 2014. A number of detainees have since been returned to their countries of origin, including Iraq and Iran. By November 2018, some refugees from Nauru had been resettled in the United States, but hopes of the United States taking more had faded, although New Zealand had repeatedly offered to take 150 per year. The Australian government refused. There were still 23 children on the island, as the government had bowed to public pressure and started removing families with children. After reports of suicidal behavior and resignation syndrome had emerged, in February 2019, the last 4 children on the island were resettled in the United States with their families. By the 31st of March 2019, there were no people held in the detention center, which had been closed. However, as of March 2020, there were 211 refugees and asylum seekers remaining on the island. As of the 13th of June 2020, a father and son were the last family left on Nauru. There is one single woman and the rest are single men. As of July 2020, over 100 men from Manus and Nauru are being detained in a hotel in Brisbane, after being transferred to the mainland for medical treatment. They are confined to quarters under a lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. Legislation has been introduced to Parliament to remove mobile phones from refugees and asylum seekers in detention, which has been widely condemned and protested. The establishment of an offshore processing center on Nauru was based on a statement of principles, signed on the 10th of September 2001 by the President of Nauru, Rene Harris, and Australia's then Minister for Defence, Peter Reith. The statement opened the way to establish a detention centre for up to 800 people and was accompanied by a pledge of $20 million Australian dollars for development activities. The initial detainees were to be people rescued by the MV Tampa, with the understanding that they would leave Nauru by May 2002. Subsequently, a memorandum of understanding was signed on the 11th of December. Boosting accommodation to 1,200 and the promised development activity by an additional $10 million. Initial plans were for asylum seekers to be housed in modern, air-conditioned housing which had been built for the games of the International Weightlifting Federation. This plan was changed after landowners' requests for extra compensation were rejected. 2 camps were built. The first camp, called Topside, was at an old sports ground and oval in the Meneng district. The second camp, called State House, was on the site of the old presidential quarters also in the Meneng district. A month-long hunger strike began on the 10th of December 2003. It included mostly Hazara from Afghanistan rescued during the Tampa affair, who were protesting for the review of their cases. By July 2005, 32 people were detained in Nauru as asylum seekers, 16 Iraqis, 11 Afghans, 2 Iranians, 2 Bangladeshis, and 1 Pakistani. All but 2 Iraqis were released to Australia, the last group of 25 leaving on the 1st of November 2005. The remaining 2 Iraqis stayed in custody for over a year. The last one was finally accepted by an undisclosed Scandinavian country after 5 years in detention, in January 2007. The other was in an Australian hospital at the time. and was later given permission to remain in Australia while his asylum case was being decided. In September 2006, a group of 8 Burmese Rohingya men were transferred there from Christmas Island. On 15 March 2007, the Australian government announced that 83 Tamils from Sri Lanka would be transferred from Christmas Island to the Nauru detention centre. They arrived in Nauru by the end of the month. In December 2007, newly elected Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd announced that his country would no longer make use of the Nauru detention centre and would put an immediate end to the Pacific solution. The last remaining Burmese and Sri Lanka detainees were granted residency rights in Australia. Nauru reacted with concern at the prospect of potentially losing much-needed aid from